Welcome to 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coach & Company. I'm Annie Kirshenman, and I'll be your host for our topic today, Leadership Trending. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video feed now so that you can focus on the slides. With me today is Ann Barton, who will be monitoring our Q&A. This is a short and to-the-point webinar, and we have a lot packed into our 20 minutes today. We also hope to have a little bit of time for questions, so if you have one or a comment, type it into the Q&A box, and we'll take what we can towards the end of the session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Annie Kirshenman. I'm a board-certified coach, and my specialty designation is Executive, Corporate, Business, and Leadership. I'm also a business person. However, the world of business is not where I started. I come from a background in the arts, and creativity as well as innovation are a major part of my work today as a coach and facilitator. I'm also a former executive. I stepped down from my CEO role in 2005, and I just love sharing what I've learned, what works, what's interesting for me as well as for others. Ergo, this webinar series. So thanks again for taking some time out of your day to join us. What we'll cover today, we're going to be talking about some of the current trends in leadership. Now, there's a lot to know about leadership trends, and in 20 minutes, we certainly can't cover it all. So I've picked two trends that I see and hear most often over time, and that I feel are at the forefront or the leading edge, if you will. Also, note we're discussing business leadership in this webinar. The concepts may or may not apply to other leadership arenas. However, in my opinion, I certainly think they should. We're also going to be looking at some of the current thought leaders in each of these trend areas and taking a look at the potential impact. So our first trend is vulnerability in leadership. Vulnerability is not only it's trending as essential to good leadership and excellent teamwork. The thought leaders that we're going to be taking a quick look at today are Patrick Lencioni, Brene Brown, Stephen Covey, and Carol DeWick. Beginning with Patrick Lencioni, the author of the perennial bestseller, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. This was first published in 2002, and it's still a #1 bestseller in the business section with over 2.5 million copies sold at this point. On the right-hand side of your screen, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team model. This is a leadership team development program. It was developed by Lencioni, and it's based on the 5 dysfunctions. Released in 2014, it helps leaders develop 5 team competencies, starting at the bottom of the pyramid: trust, the ability to be able to engage in productive conflict, commitment, accountability, and a focus on results. Relevant to the trend of vulnerability, we will focus on trust, the foundation today. The key concepts here, Lencioni talks about vulnerability-based trust, and this is as opposed to predictability-based trust, which most of us are familiar with. He defines vulnerability-based trust as the confidence among team members that their peers' intentions are good and that there's no reason to be protective or careful around the team. We're looking to develop the ability here to be able to say and really mean things like, I'm sorry, I messed up, I made a mistake, I really need help here, I'm over my head. Lencioni says, we're looking to develop leaders who openly acknowledge that they sweat and are willing to let others see that. You may also be interested in these publications by Lencioni. The Advantage and the Ideal Team Player goes also into some more depth on this topic of vulnerability. And if you'd like to learn more about the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team program, you can hop on over to our website at akacoachandcompany.com. So that's a very quick look at our first thought leader. Our second thought leader, Brené Brown, is the best-selling author of the 3 publications you see here, The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, and Rising Strong. She's an in-demand speaker and facilitator among some pretty big players such as Virgin, Costco, Pixar Animations. Her TED Talks have tens of thousands of views, and if you haven't had a chance to hear her, highly recommend you go search for those talks. She's a self-described researcher and storyteller, and her vision is to start a global conversation about vulnerability and shame. Her key concepts here are, as a leader, be yourself. Be all in, fall, get up, try again. Similar to Lencioni, Brown says, admitting our mistakes, owning the story as well as the feelings, then getting back in the game. This is part of the model of the new leader. She writes, we have all failed, and it's painful. Failure really hurts. And she says that usually gets gussied up or gold-plated, as she calls it. She says, rather than trying to make failure look fashionable, let's learn how to recognize the beauty in truth and tenacity. And her point of view is that our leaders of the future will model this. So quick look at Brené Brown. And our third thought leader, Stephen M.R. Covey, is the son of, well, Covey, the author of the ever-popular 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And his book is about trust. His key concepts, he says, trust is a pragmatic, tangible asset that you can create, similar to Lencioni's idea. The idea here is that trust is not nebulous and can actually be fostered. And Covey says a leader's first job is to inspire what he calls smart trust. He describes this as the sweet spot between distrust and suspicion on one end of the spectrum and blind trust or gullibility on the other end. He says it requires the leader to be aware of her or his feelings as well as proclivities, and to learn to be able to master both a high propensity for trust as well as analysis. He says this requires a degree of vulnerability and risk-taking on the part of the leader. The rewards are great. He says nothing is as fast as the speed of trust, and he writes about this at great length. At the bottom of the slide here, you can see he feels trust has real economic impacts. Where there is low trust of a leader or low trust within a team or an organization, he says this decreases the speed of everything and increases the cost. Conversely, where there's high trust of a leader, team, within an organization, it increases the speed of everything, which automatically decreases costs. Fascinating reading, The Speed of Trust. Our fourth thought leader and final thought leader in this trend of vulnerability in leadership is Carol Dweck. She's written a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. If you follow 20 Minutes to Business Insights, you know I'm a big fan of Dweck's. Now, there's a lot to read in this book, and if you haven't picked it up yet or haven't read it yet, I suggest that you do. Specifically with regard to leaders and vulnerability, these are the key concepts from Dweck's thesis. She's looking to develop growth mindset leaders. Specifically, these are leaders who believe in human potential and development and place a high focus or high premium on learning. Again, like Lencioni, these are leaders who are willing to admit mistakes, willing to learn from mistakes like Brene Brown, and who actively go out and seek feedback for improvement. She says, true self-confidence is the courage for leaders to be open, to welcome new ideas and change regardless of where they come from, and leaders who foster a sense of inclusiveness. So she says our growth mindset leaders, the leaders of the future, will exhibit these qualities as well as foster them in others. Okay, so again, very brief look at our first trend, vulnerability in leadership. Now shifting to our focus to the second trend, innovation, unleashing creativity in leadership. So the four thought leaders that we'll be taking, again, a very quick look at today: the Center for Creative Leadership, Whitney Johnson, Daniel H. Pink, and Mary Lou de Coster. I certainly hope I am pronouncing her name correctly, and my apologies if it is not correctly pronounced. So our first thought leader, the Center for Creative Leadership, specifically Nick Patry, published this study in 2015, Future Trends in Leadership. This study actually identifies 4 trends in leadership. We'll be sending you a link for the report after the webinar so that you can review them all if you wish, and I hope you do, because it's fascinating stuff. Today we'll be focusing on one of those trends, which is innovation. In the study, the #1 rated competency cited by CEOs is creativity. Specifically, the capacity to manage as well as deal with change, to develop adaptive competencies that foster learning, learning agility, the ability to unlearn and relearn, a high degree of emotional intelligence, interesting in relationship to creativity or innovation, and also the confidence of leaders to confront the unknown, the ability to think at a macro level, i.e. strategically. So again, fascinating study. #1 trend in this study was creativity or innovation. Our second thought leader in this trend is Whitney Johnson, and she's written a book called Disrupt Yourself: Putting the Power of Disruptive Innovation to Work. Her key concepts: she says disruption is actually essential to success and to innovation. She talks about this as leaders being able to see the gap and then daring to create something for which a market, for example, may not exist. She says we live in a time of accelerating disruption, and she says no one is immune from this. So why not make it intentional? She talks about managing the S-curve waves, these so-called S-curve waves of learning and mastery. So this is the ongoing cycle of learning something new, learning a new skill, and then mastering it, then disrupting it, learning something new, mastering that. And she says this is a requisite skill for our future leaders. She says good leadership will foster intentional disruption, and that equals innovation, the service of innovation. So again, another fascinating thought leader, Whitney Johnson, Disrupt Yourself. Our third thought leader, love this guy, he's one of my favorites, Daniel H. Pink, wrote a book called A Whole New Mind: Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. I believe this was his first publication, certainly his first bestseller. And if you haven't read it, you're in for a treat. He talks about right brain abilities being essential to success in the conceptual age. This is opposed to the more left brain focus of the information age, our left brain skills being more sequential, logical, analytical. He discusses 6 essential aptitudes or senses, if you will, to be cultivated by leadership, as well as anyone in business. And so we're going to take just a quick look at those 6 senses, which are very right brain focused. He talks first about a sense of design. He says this is beyond functional. He said our designs of the future in business are going to have beauty, whimsy. They're going to be emotionally engaging, which again, much more right brain emphasis. He talks about a sense of story. He says communication is no longer just about putting forward an effective argument. It includes the ability to create a compelling narrative, and our leaders and successful business people of the future will be able to do this. A sense of symphony. He says not just analysis anymore, it's also synthesis, specifically the ability to see the big picture, cross boundaries, and put the disparate pieces together in a way that makes sense. A sense of empathy. Our leaders will no longer just be logical, the more left brain approach. Our leaders will have the ability to understand others, care for others, and forge relationships. A sense of play. He says too much sobriety is bad for us as leaders, bad for us as business people, bad for us as human beings. So we're likely to see a lot more laughter, games, and humor, and a leadership emphasis on this in the future. And finally, a sense of meaning. This is a focus on purpose and fulfillment, and developing that not only in ourselves as leaders, but fostering that in our organizations. So our third thought leader, Dan Pink, A Whole New Mind. Our fourth and final thought leader in this trend of innovation is Mary Lou DeCoster. Again, my apologies if I'm butchering that. She's written a book called Right Brain, Left Brain Leadership. She puts forward the idea that both these so-called right brain qualities and left brain qualities are going to be required in the future for effective leadership. She says leaders in all fields are going to need these twin abilities, the ability to be methodical, logical, analytical, the more left brain approach, as well as more strategic, innovative, and intuitive, the more right brain approach. She says successful leaders will learn how to leverage both of these skill sets and know when to apply which skill. So again, our successful leaders will be able to apply the left brain approach when that's appropriate. We'll be able to apply the right brain approach when that is appropriate. And she says this requires developing the capacity to shift thinking style. So again, this is not only going to be a hallmark of our future leaders, it's also going to be a skill requirement. Right brain, left brain leadership, another great thought leader. All right, so those are the 2 trends we had time to cover today. And what does it all mean? Well, everything that I reviewed in terms of leadership trends, including the trends that I wasn't able to include here today, say we're going to be seeing a different kind of leader in the future. We're going to be seeing a shift from the more traditional or conventional leadership thinking of the kind of never let them see you sweat or having all the answers or top-down leadership. These are going to be a thing of the past. Chances are our leaders of the future will sweat. Well, we already know that they do. The difference here is that our leaders of the future are going to be more and more willing to show it. They're going to be able to roll up their sleeves and get in there. That's what the trends are indicating. No more edicts from on high. These are leaders who are going to be able to admit that they messed up, what their mistakes are, articulate what they learned from it, and they're going to be able to model and explain how they're getting up from being knocked down. These leaders will be able to say, hey, I don't know. I don't have all the answers, and let's figure it out together. They'll also be able to foster cultures of teamwork, learning, questioning, and creativity. So again, a quick look at the possible impact of these leadership trends. So we are coming up to time. Briefly, what's next? You're going to be receiving a follow-up email after the webinar with information on how you can get your hands on the resources I mentioned if you'd like to take a deeper look. There'll be a link for the recording of this webinar if you'd like to view it again or share it with somebody else, and some information on how to register for the next free 20 Minutes to Business Insights, which will be November 16th at 12 noon Central, where we will be taking a look at emotional intelligence. Now, if you're new to emotional intelligence, or if you could use a concise refresher, this webinar is for you. We'll look at what is it, a snapshot of the science, how it looks in the workplace and why it's important, as well as some tips for developing an emotionally intelligent business or workplace. So, Anne, I have time, so we're going to be having to skip our questions for today. Let me just end by saying, once again, this has been 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coach and Company. Thank you for joining us live or viewing the recording. I'm Annie Kirschman, and this is my contact information if you'd like to be in touch. And I hope to see you at our next webinar on November 16th, where we'll be talking about emotional intelligence. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.